The crystal spires of the Etherian palace caught the light of three suns, casting rainbow shadows across the grand hall where Princess Narcissa stood alone. Unlike her people, whose skin shimmered with translucent crystalline patterns, her flesh remained stubbornly opaque, marking her as different from the moment of her birth. At 20 stellar cycles old, she had long since learned to navigate the edges of court life, becoming as much a shadow as the ones dancing across the polished floors. The annual Convergence Festival was in full swing, with Etherian nobles gliding through the hall in their ceremonial robes that seemed to capture starlight itself. Narcissa watched from her familiar corner, wearing the simplest dress she could get away with while still maintaining her royal status. Her mother, Queen Celestia, hadn't even glanced in her direction during the opening ceremonies. "Another fascinating gathering, isn't it?" The quiet voice belonged to her only friend, Dr. Thuron, the court's chief scientist, and perhaps the only person who saw her as more than a genetic disappointment. His crystalline features were weathered with age, creating intricate patterns that reflected his centuries of knowledge. "Fascinating isn't quite the word I'd choose," Narcissa replied, watching as her younger sister Astria commanded attention at the center of the hall. "I believe predictable might be more accurate." Thuron's expression softened. "You know, your condition might be unique, but it doesn't make you less Etherian. In fact, my research suggests—" A commotion at the grand entrance cut him short. The massive doors swung open, revealing a delegation that made every crystalline being in the room turn in surprise. Humans had arrived early for the diplomatic summit, their timing either a terrible breach of protocol or a brilliant political move. Leading them was a tall figure who moved with military precision, his dark skin contrasting sharply with the ethereal pallor of the Etherian court. Narcissa found herself leaning forward, intrigued by the confidence in his stride. Unlike previous human diplomats who seemed overwhelmed by Etherian grandeur, this one appeared completely at ease. "Commander James Harrison," Thuron whispered, always well-informed. "Earth's new chief diplomatic officer for the Outer Rim. They say he brokered peace with the Nexus Collective." Narcissa watched as Harrison approached the throne, where her father, King Helios, sat in regal silence. The human showed perfect knowledge of Etherian customs, performing the ceremonial greeting with unexpected grace. Yet there was something in his eyes, a hint of careful assessment that suggested he saw more than he revealed. Those same eyes found her moments later, and unlike every other diplomatic visitor she'd ever encountered, his gaze didn't slide away in discomfort. Instead, he offered a subtle nod, acknowledging her presence as if she were any other royal family member. "The timing of their arrival isn't coincidental," Thuron mused. "There are rumors of unrest in the outer colonies. The humans must know something." Narcissa barely heard him, her attention caught by the way Harrison smoothly integrated himself into conversations with various court members. He was gathering information, she realized, but doing so with such skill that even her people's legendary perception couldn't detect any obvious questioning. When the commander eventually made his way to their corner, Narcissa straightened instinctively. Up close, she could see the small scars on his hands, marks of someone who had earned his position through more than just political maneuvering. "Princess Narcissa," he said, his voice carrying none of the usual hesitation others showed around her. "I've heard fascinating things about your work with ancient artifacts. I'd be very interested in learning more if you're willing to share." She blinked in surprise. Her private research, conducted in the forgotten corners of the palace archives, wasn't something anyone at court usually acknowledged. "You seem well-informed, Commander Harrison." "Information is the foundation of understanding," he replied with a slight smile. "And understanding is what I'm here to build." Before she could respond, a crystal chime rang through the hall, signaling the start of the formal ceremonies. Harrison excused himself with another perfect bow, but Narcissa couldn't shake the feeling that their brief exchange had set something significant in motion. As she watched him rejoin his delegation, she noticed her mother's disapproving glance and her sister's barely concealed sneer. But for the first time in years, their judgment felt distant, overshadowed by the possibility that someone had finally seen past her differences to recognize something valuable within. Commander Harrison found himself in the ancient library of the Etherian Palace 3 days after the Convergence Festival. The vast chamber stretched upward into darkness, its walls lined with crystalline data structures that stored millennia of knowledge. But he wasn't here for the archives, he was following a hunch. As expected, he found Princess Narcissa tucked away in a corner, surrounded by dormant artifacts and holographic displays. She looked up at his approach, surprise flickering across her features before being replaced by careful neutrality. "Commander, this is an unexpected visit," she said, closing the display she had been studying. "Please don't stop on my account," Harrison replied, gesturing to her work. "I meant what I said about being interested in your research." Narcissa studied him for a moment, then slowly reopened the display. "You're the first diplomat who sought me out here. Most prefer my sister's company in the court gardens." "I find gardens overrated when compared to history," he said, examining the artifacts scattered across her workspace. His eyes landed on a particular piece, an ancient navigation device, if he wasn't mistaken, especially when that history might hold answers to current problems. "What problems would those be, Commander?" Narcissa's voice carried a hint of challenge. Harrison smiled, pulling up a seat across from her. "The kind that has your outer colonies going dark one by one. The kind that has Earth's deep space monitoring stations picking up energy signatures we haven't seen in 10,000 years. The princess's hands stilled over her work. "You're well-informed indeed, though I wonder why you're sharing this information with the one member of the royal family who holds no influence." "Because I think your lack of influence might be exactly what makes you valuable." Harrison leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Your research, it's not just academic curiosity, is it? You're looking for something specific." Narcissa hesitated, then activated another display. Ancient schematics filled the air between them, showing structures that made Harrison's breath catch. "These were built by my ancestors, spread throughout what is now contested space. The court scholars dismiss them as remnants of a primitive age, but I believe they're more. They're a network, Commander, a defensive network." "And you think they're activating again?" Harrison finished, pieces clicking into place. "That's what our stations are detecting." "Yes, but I can't get anyone to listen. The court is too proud to consider that our ancestors' technology might be relevant to modern problems. And my condition makes it easy for them to dismiss my findings." Harrison stood, packing the length of her workspace. "Princess, I'm going to be direct. Earth sent me here because we believe something is coming, something that has both our people's deep space outposts retreating. I need allies who care more about finding answers than maintaining appearances." "And you think I'm such an ally?" Narcissa asked, though her eyes had lit up with interest. "I think you're the only person in this palace who values truth over tradition," he replied. "The fact that your own people can't see your worth doesn't diminish it, it only shows their blindness." A crash from the library entrance interrupted them. Dr. Thuron stumbled in, his crystalline features distorted with urgency. "Princess, Commander, thank the stars you're both here. We've lost contact with the Helios colony." Narcissa was on her feet instantly. "All contact." "Complete silence," Thuron confirmed, his voice grim. "And the energy readings just before we lost them. They match your research predictions exactly." Harrison watched as Narcissa quickly gathered her data crystals. "I assume the king is calling an emergency session." "Yes, but..." Thuron glanced at Narcissa apologetically. "But I'm not invited," she finished, her jaw set in determination. "It doesn't matter. Commander Harrison, would you be willing to take a slight diplomatic risk?" Harrison raised an eyebrow, already guessing her intention. "I'm listening." "As Earth's representative, you have the right to bring advisory staff to all diplomatic sessions. And as I'm currently consulting with you on historical artifacts relevant to our people's shared interests." A slow smile spread across Harrison's face. "I'd say that makes you essential personnel, Princess." "This is highly irregular," Thuron warned, though he couldn't quite hide his approval. "So is losing an entire colony," Narcissa replied, gathering the last of her research materials. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? They can't make me any more of an outcast than I already am. As they hurried through the crystal corridors toward the council chambers, Harrison found himself reassessing the princess. Beneath her quiet exterior lay a core of steel that reminded him of Earth's greatest scientists and explorers, people who pursued truth regardless of the personal cost. "You realize this could change everything," he said quietly as they approached the chambers. Narcissa's response carried the weight of years of preparation. "Commander, everything already has changed. The others just haven't accepted it yet." The council chamber erupted in chaos when Narcissa entered alongside Commander Harrison. King Helios's crystalline features darkened with disapproval, while Queen Celestia pointedly looked away. Only Princess Astria's reaction was direct, a laugh of pure derision. "Surely we're not allowing her to participate in matters of state," Astria's voice carried across the chamber. Harrison stepped forward before anyone could respond. "As Earth's representative, I've requested Princess Narcissa's expertise on historical defensive systems. Given the current crisis, I believe her research is crucial." The king's expression remained stormy, but intergalactic diplomatic protocols bound his hands. "Proceed with your report, Commander." Narcissa activated her data displays, filling the chamber with ancient schematics. "The energy signatures from Helios colony match patterns I've documented from our ancestral defense network. The system isn't dead, it's reactivating, and I believe it's responding to a threat our ancestors faced before." "Absurd," General Virus interrupted, his crystalline armor catching the light. "Our modern defensive systems are far superior to any ancient technology." "Then why did they fail to protect Helios colony?" Harrison's question hung in the air like a challenge. Before anyone could argue further, the chamber's emergency alerts flashed to life. A communications officer burst in, his features distorted with panic. "Multiple contacts approaching the Centauri outpost. Energy signatures match those from Helios colony." Narcissa's fingers flew over her displays. "The pattern's the same. Whatever this is, it's following the old defensive line. Our ancestors built these outposts in specific positions for a reason." "Show me," Harrison demanded, moving closer to study her data. His military training recognized the strategic positioning immediately. "These aren't random placements, they're a barrier." "A barrier against what?" King Helios finally asked, his royal demeanor cracking slightly. The answer came in the form of another alert. The main display activated, showing a feed from the Centauri outpost. Strange ships filled the screen, organic-looking vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As they watched, one of the ships opened like a blooming flower, revealing crystalline structures that eerily mirrored Etherian architecture. "Impossible," Queen Celestia whispered. "No," Narcissa's voice was firm as she overlaid ancient images with the current feed. "This is what our ancestors fought, a species that mimics and corrupts crystalline technology. They're called the Void Shapers." "And how exactly did you discover this information that our own scholars missed?" Astria demanded. Narcissa hesitated, then placed her hand on one of the ancient artifacts she'd brought. To everyone's shock, it hummed to life, responding to her touch in a way it never had for other Etherians. "Because I'm different," she said quietly. "My condition isn't a flaw, it's an adaptation. Our ancestors engineered certain bloodlines to interface with their technology differently, creating backup systems in case the Void Shapers ever returned. The records were clear, but no one bothered to read them properly." Harrison watched in fascination as the artifact projected detailed tactical data about their ancient enemy. "Your lack of crystalline features. It's not a defect. It's a purposeful design." "A fail-safe," Dr. Thuron added, his scientific curiosity overcoming court protocol. "The ability to operate our most powerful defensive systems without being vulnerable to crystalline corruption." Another alert sounded. The Void Shapers had begun their attack on the Centauri outpost. The chamber descended into frantic discussion about modern defensive options, but Harrison kept his attention on Narcissa. She was utterly focused on the ancient device, her fingers moving across its surface with increasing confidence. I can activate the old network, she said suddenly, cutting through the chaos. But I'll need direct access to the primary node. It's in the catacombs beneath the palace. Out of the question, General Virus protested. Those areas are restricted. They're restricted because they're dangerous, Narcissa corrected. The power systems down there are keyed to respond only to non-crystalline interfaces, like me. King Helios rose from his throne, his authority silencing all other voices. He stared at his outcast daughter for a long moment, centuries of tradition warring with immediate necessity. You understand what you're proposing? He finally asked. If you're wrong. Then we lose nothing more than we're already losing, Narcissa finished. But if I'm right, we save not just our people, but every crystalline-based civilization in this sector. Harrison stepped forward. I'll accompany her. Earth stands with our allies, especially in matters involving ancient threats. The king's gaze shifted between them, then to the display showing the ongoing attack. Finally, he nodded. Do what must be done, but understand this, the consequences of failure will fall on both of you. As they hurried from the chamber, Harrison caught Narcissa's expression, not fear or triumph, but quiet determination. Ready to make history, Princess? Commander, she replied with a hint of a smile, I believe we already have. The ancient catacombs beneath the Etherian palace were a maze of dormant technology and pulsing power conduits. Harrison's tactical flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing apparatus that looked more organic than mechanical. Beside him, Narcissa moved with surprising certainty, as if drawn by an unseen force. The primary node should be just ahead, she said, consulting her data tablet. These passages, they're exactly like the schematics I studied, but seeing them in person. A distant rumble shook dust from the ceiling. Above them, the palace's modern defenses would be mobilizing against the approaching Void Shaper fleet. Time was running out. More colonies have gone dark, Harrison reported, checking his communications device. The Void Shapers are moving faster than we anticipated. They rounded a corner and entered a vast chamber that took Harrison's breath away. A massive crystalline structure dominated the center, its surface etched with patterns that seemed to shift in his flashlight beam. Unlike the gleaming technology above, this machine had a raw, primal quality that spoke of desperate times and last resorts. This is it, Narcissa breathed, the heart of the defensive network. She approached the central console, her hands hovering over its surface. Our ancestors left this for someone like me, all those years of being different, of being cast aside. This was the reason. Harrison positioned himself near the chamber's entrance, weapon ready. Whatever you're going to do, Princess, do it fast. We've got company. Shadows moved in the corridor behind them, palace guards led by General Virus. The general's crystalline armor looked almost black in the dim light. Step away from the console, Princess. This is a direct order from the crown. What? Narcissa didn't take her hands from the console. But father approved. The king has reconsidered, Virus cut her off. We cannot risk our entire civilization on ancient technology and a defective princess. Harrison moved to stand between Narcissa and the guards. Your modern defenses are failing, General. The Void Shapers are cutting through them like they don't exist. This is our only option. Another explosion rocked the chamber, closer this time. Dust and small crystals rained from the ceiling. Narcissa's voice carried over the chaos. It doesn't matter what you believe about me. This system will only respond to someone with my genetic profile. If you stop me, you doom everyone above us. Then we'll find another way, Virus raised his weapon. One that doesn't require. His words cut off as the chamber plunged into total darkness. The general's crystalline armor cast a faint glow, but even Harrison's tactical light had failed. In the pitch black, a new sound emerged, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through their bones. No, Narcissa's voice was firm. No more waiting, no more doubt. The central console erupted with light, patterns racing across its surface like liquid lightning. They spread to the walls, the floor, racing through ancient conduits that had laid dormant for millennia. Harrison shielded his eyes as Narcissa's form began to glow, not with the typical Etherian crystalline luminescence, but with something deeper, more fundamental. "By the ancestors," one of the guards whispered. Narcissa's eyes had gone completely white, her hands seemingly merged with the console's surface. When she spoke, her voice echoed with harmonics that made Harrison's teeth ache. "I understand now. The network isn't just a weapon, it's a key. Our ancestors didn't just fight the Void Shapers, they imprisoned them. And now—" The entire chamber pulsed with power. Above them, through layers of rock and crystal, Harrison could hear a sound like reality itself being torn apart. Narcissa's voice rose. "Now we do it again." Light exploded outward from the chamber, racing through the catacombs and up into the palace above. Harrison caught glimpses of ancient machinery awakening, systems connecting, a web of power stretching out to every remaining colony and outpost. In orbit, forgotten satellites hummed to life, their combined energy forming patterns that had last been seen 10,000 years ago. And in the center of it all stood Narcissa, no longer the unwanted princess, but the key to her civilization's survival, exactly as her ancestors had planned. The celebration of victory in the Etherian palace was unlike anything in living memory. Where once crystal spires had reflected only the light of the three suns, they now pulsed with the power of awakened ancient technology. The Void Shapers had been driven back, their ships scattered across the void by forces they had forgotten how to fear. Commander Harrison stood at the edge of the Great Hall, watching as Narcissa received a steady stream of officials and diplomats. Gone was the Shadow Princess who hid in corners. In her place stood a woman who had reshaped the understanding of her entire civilization. "Quite a change, isn't it?" Dr. Thuron appeared beside him, his crystalline features reflecting the new lights that danced through the palace. "Though perhaps not as much of a change as we think. She was always this person, we just couldn't see it." "Some of us could," Harrison replied, thinking of their first meeting at the Convergence Festival. "We just needed to look past the surface." Across the hall, King Helios rose from his throne. The chamber fell silent as he approached Narcissa. For a moment, father and daughter stood facing each other, generations of misunderstanding hanging between them. "My daughter," the king's voice carried clearly through the hall. "I owe you an apology, we all do. We looked at your difference and saw weakness when we should have seen purpose." Narcissa met his gaze steadily. "I never needed an apology, father. I only needed a chance to prove my worth." "You've done more than that." Queen Celestia stepped forward, her expression softer than Harrison had ever seen it. "You've reminded us of who we truly are. Our ancestors were wise enough to plan for this day, to ensure that our civilization would survive. But in our pride, we nearly forgot their wisdom." Princess Astria, standing nearby, looked uncomfortable but managed a small nod of acknowledgement to her sister. It wasn't perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. The king raised his voice to address the entire gathering. "From this day forward, our understanding of strength must change. The ancient network remains active, and with it, a new era begins. Princess Narcissa will oversee the integration of old and new technologies, bridging our past and our future." Harrison watched as Narcissa accepted her new role with the same quiet dignity she had shown in exile. But now, that dignity was recognized for what it was, not a defense against rejection, but the core of who she had always been. Later, as the celebration continued, Narcissa found a moment to join Harrison in his quiet corner. "I understand you've been recalled to Earth," she said. "Temporarily," he replied. "They want a full briefing on the ancient network and its implications for human colonies, but I'll be back. Earth is establishing a permanent diplomatic mission here, focused on technological cooperation." "And who will lead this mission?" Harrison smiled. "They offered me the position, if you think you can tolerate having me around more permanently." "I suppose we could find some use for you," she said, her own smile matching his. "After all, someone needs to represent human interests in the new age we're building." Above them, ancient and modern lights danced together across crystal surfaces, creating patterns that had never been seen before. In those patterns, Harrison saw the future, not just of the Etherian Empire or Earth, but of all species who were willing to look past surface differences to find strength in diversity. To new beginnings, he offered. Narcissa's response carried the weight of history and the promise of tomorrow. To seeing beyond the surface, Commander, and to all the discoveries that await us there. In the great hall of the Etherian palace, where an unwanted princess had once hidden in shadows, a new light shone, not the cold brilliance of crystal, nor the warm glow of human technology, but something in between. Something new. Something that spoke of bridges built and barriers broken, of ancient wisdom rediscovered, and of a future where difference wasn't just tolerated, but celebrated as the gift it had always been.